WRSD.
Science fiction.
Became after the War of the Planets. In the wreckage of the laboratories found on planet Earth, we found the only records that were called videos of the future fair. These barely salvageable image files show the creator, Geo San H, and his assistant, Girlbot.
Future Fair is all about science fiction. Take a journey to the worlds of science fiction created by writers, filmmakers, and artists over the last 140 years. When did science fiction in literature begin? Let's start with the Gutenberg press, invented in Germany in the 1400s. Here is a recreation of an early print shop of about 1750. Can you see the newly printed pages drying on a line in the background? With the introduction of the press, the beginnings of freedom of speech had arrived. Books and pamphlets could be authored by anyone from that time forward. In the 1939 film The Hunchback of Notre Dame, King Louis XI was an advocate of the new press. In this scene, he is visiting with the operator of the press. Across the way was Notre Dame Cathedral, where the archdeacon who despised the free press lived. Over the next 400 years, fictional and historical writing eventually took the place of the Bible in popularity.
Most fiction was based on real events of the time. Characters in the stories could be fictional, but the world they lived in was not.
Here is the faith-based novel Beatty's Charity, published in 1905. The illustrations show scenes from life rather than a fantasy world. In a first-person fireside series book from 1890, a boy named Ronald becomes involved with a Scottish king who was trying to take over England in 1728. In The Boy Bruisers from 1893, we read of their adventures as they guide their canoes through the Florida swamps. The print media continued to spread throughout the country, from small towns to industrialized cities, where newsstands became a popular hangout to young and old alike. Also called pulp literature, they fed the insatiable hunger for stories in a cheaper form. Those which were more fantastic, romantic, scary, violent, or amazing. As you can see, this girl is reading her favorite comic book. Close by are some of the best pulp magazines, such as Famous Detective and Super Detective, Black Mask, Avenger Stories, love novels, and True Confessions, the granddaddy of all tell-all magazines, which are still a large part of the publishing industry today. In the early 1900s, pulp magazines presented the world's first science fiction stories. Argosy and All Story, published in New York, and Black Cat, published in Boston, were the first all-fiction publications in the U.S. The first science fiction story ever published was conceived by this dapper young Frenchman. His name was Jules Verne. His story, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, was first published in France in 1870. Using engineering concepts from the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, his grasp of the wonders that awaited mankind have made his tale of the Nautilus and its fantastic exploits a perennial favorite. Here is a poster from the Walt Disney film that thrilled audiences over 80 years after it was first written. In a scene from the movie, Captain Nemo is hosting a dinner in the dining room of his scientific creation, the Nautilus. Science fiction was a marriage of never-before-seen and experienced fictional stories and the endless possibilities of newly invented technology. Here is an illustration of the Nautilus from the original book of the 1870s. This is the poster issued for French audiences, showing men from the Nautilus harvesting underwater crops for the crew and guests. This young man, H.G. Wells from England, created the next two stories in the beginnings of science fiction. His first story was The Time Machine, published in 1895. Here are 4 scenes from the MGM film of the 1960s. Here is another version of the story from a Classics Illustrated magazine. H.G. Wells' second was War of the Worlds, written in 1897 and shown in this Amazing Stories pulp magazine cover of 1905. Here is the poster from the 1953 film showing the interstellar vehicles, which contain the Martian creatures that contributed to one of the spookiest moments in film history. By the 1930s, radio, movies, and pulp magazines were all bringing science fiction to the public's attention. Sci-Fi magazine issues varied greatly, from the earthly sexiness of Buck Rogers to fantastical tales in Martian landscapes told by Edgar Rice Burroughs, to this basic sci-fi story of Sojar of Titan. When the world was entering the Great Depression in the 1930s, 4 big films introduced science fiction to the world and set the foundation for future sci-fi. The film Metropolis, from Fritz Lang of Germany, envisioned a futuristic city and introduced the concept of a robot in human form. Woman in the Moon, also from Fritz Lang, was the first to show how a rocket was created and launched in great technical detail. The building of the ship and the launch platform, as well as the flight path to the moon, were also shown. Just Imagine was a 1930s science fiction musical comedy where airplanes have replaced cars, numbers have replaced names, pills have replaced food and liquor, and babies come from vending machines. Sets and props from this film were later used in Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers movie serials. Set pieces from Just Imagine also contributed to the spectacular scene where a room full of powerful electrical equipment was used to revive Frankenstein's monster. H.G. Wells' Things to Come was an epic drama about how science rebuilds society after a total war destroys the world in the near future of 1966. Here is a view of the rebuilt city that the last surviving engineers and mechanics completed in 2036. Here is one of the dwellings in the new city, showing the styles in architecture and fashion known as Art Deco. This couple, who are leading the way to space exploration at the end of the story, are viewing their future among the stars. The final invasion of sci-fi stories came in the form of movie serials shown in theaters during the 1930s and 40s. During World War II, young Americans flocked to movie theaters to see Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, and other popular 30-minute serials. Serials were made by filming the entire storyline and presenting it in segments or episodes. Each episode always concluded with a dramatic cliffhanger ending. While waiting for the next Buck or Flash episode to blaze across the screen, audiences watched cartoons and their favorite singing cowboy hero, as well as news of the world presented by Pathé or Fox. By the end of the 1950s, science fiction had given us new optimism toward the future of space exploration.
From out of the future comes